episode of The Baiting Game. If you don't already know, this is a spin-off of the game show The Dating Game, which aired from 1965 to 1973. In our version, instead of hosting contestants and having them ask questions of each other to determine the best romantic match and figure out who's going to go on a date with the main contestant, I will instead be performing a narrated presentation of relationships in prison. Specifically, I will be discussing relationships between inmates and the workers in the institutions they reside in. This will include juicy details involving how each relationship came to be, the profession within the prison or the sentencing of the people involved, and the outcomes subsequent to them pursuing such a relationship. I will also touch on attempts by the prison system to educate and train workers on how they should interact with inmates, and how to avoid being manipulated or seduced by them. Apparently, "Don't fall in love with your prisoner" needs to be written in bold font on the application. Alright, let's get into it. To begin, I'll introduce our players. Our prison employee in the first place is one Joyce Mitchell. She was a tailor by trade, but a hopeless romantic at heart. Perhaps this is why she fell for two men, both prisoners where she worked, and went to great ends to please them. Let's meet these Casanovas. First, we have Richard Matt, a convicted murderer. According to Joyce, he was quite flirty and he made her feel special. Over time, he asked his lady more and more favors and kept her in his arm by telling her, "You know I love you." Naturally, this led to their relationship becoming sexual and to Joyce putting both her career and her life on the line for our man Richard Matt and for our other contestant, David Sweat. Sweat, like his buddy/competition, is also a convicted murderer. He did not develop any sort of sexual relationship with Joyce, but he did entice her with notes of love-lust. However, he stated his intention with these notes was simply to placate Joyce. And Joyce, on the other hand, stated that she would think of her husband while writing these lustful letters. Even so, Joyce said that she cared more about Sweat than Matt, and that she imagined a future life with him, with Matt as just one of their buddies. Of course, I assume this would mean she would stop sleeping with him, but you never know. Unfortunately for all three of them, they never got to experience the life they imagined on the outside. Joyce provided tools, connections to the outside, and a getaway ride to help the men escape, for which she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. In regards to the men, Richard Matt was shot and killed during reapprehension, while Sweat was simply shot and recaptured. Not exactly a fairy tale ending, but you live and you learn. Unless you're Richard Matt. Next instance of inappropriate workplace romances, I chose a case that is almost the reverse of our previous situation, in that there's only one inmate and multiple correctional employees involved. 4 to be exact. Let's start with our prisoner, one Tavon White. Originally incarcerated for an attempted murder charge, White led the Black Guerrilla Family, BGF gang, from behind bars. His gang, with many members consisting of both prison workers and fellow prisoners, brought in about $16,000 a month through the trafficking of various contraband, mostly cell phones and drugs. Tavon's White used this money and power, along with threats, to meet whatever ends they desired, giving White a feeling of total power and control within the Baltimore City Detention Center. This feeling was surely magnified by the fact that during his rule over this kingdom of corruption, White engaged in sexual relationships with no less than 14 female correctional officers of the institution. We can say this with certainty because it was revealed that White impregnated that amount of women during his time in prison that we know of. As if that wasn't enough, one of the officers got a tattoo displaying his first name, Tavon, on her wrist, and another officer got one saying the same thing on her neck. Let's discuss these lovely ladies. First up, we have Tiffany Linder. She allegedly smuggled contraband, allegedly tipped off Tavon White and his gang before a planned search within the prison, and definitely pled guilty to taking part in a racketeering conspiracy. According to White, the reason she knew about the predetermined shakedown of which she warned him about was because she was sleeping with another corrections officer in the jail. Obviously, one who was in the know. Our next contestant of sorts is one Chania Brooks. She was an alleged pill smuggler and was said to answer to White even when deciding what to do after witnessing one inmate attack another, who was also a fellow gang member. So she's a correctional officer that answered to an inmate when deciding what to do during an inmate-on-inmate inter-gang member attack. It isn't this that makes KK stand out, however, and it isn't her lunacy either. She has a tattoo of Tavon's name on her wrist so as to honor the father of her child, who just so happens to be essentially the regional manager of the contraband trade within the Baltimore City Detention Center. Last of all is Jennifer Owens, also known as J.O. or simply O. O pled guilty to smuggling pills, pot, tobacco, and medication in strip form into the prison, and her name makes an appearance alongside that of Chania Brooks on the honorary wall of fairly priced fellatio. If that wasn't enough to win the heart of White, O got his first name, Tavon, tattooed on her neck, overshadowing KK's measly wrist tat. To really seal the deal, Owens had 2 of White's children, which is twice as many as any of the other 3 women can claim. Now, in our father's show, The Dating Game, it is sort of at this point where I would open up the floor to the person selecting a blind date to ask questions of each contestant before deciding who they wish to actually go out on a date with. Typically, it's one woman behind a wall and then 3 contestants on the other side of the wall, and she can speak to each of them as she wishes. However, in our bastardized, quarantine-friendly, institutional corrections-oriented version of the show, I will instead be speculating as to which partner our 2 players with the power of choice would choose. That is, Tavon White and Joyce Mitchell. I will then deviate completely from the traditional show by providing insight and information on how these sort of inappropriate prison relationships spark in the first place, as well as on rules and recommendations intended to prevent them. Okay, let's refer back to our first contestants, Joyce Mitchell and her boy toys, Richard Matt and David Sweat. For their situation, guessing Joyce's choice, registered trademark, is pretty easy. This is for 2 reasons. 1, because she explicitly stated that she cared more about Sweat, and 2, because Matt was fatally shot and Sweat wasn't. So, what I'm trying to say is, congratulations to the happy couple. If they're lucky, maybe the conductor they hire for Sweat's funeral will be an ordained and licensed wedding officiant. Joyce could hit 2 jailbirds with 1 gravestone. Our second situation gets a little more complicated in terms of parties involved and potential choices made by gang leader Tavon White. He is obviously a man of many talents, and apparently a man of many tastes, so how can he be expected to settle for just 1 lady? The real answer is, he probably never will. But, for our purposes, and partly out of hope, let's say White would choose Jennifer Owens. She's the oldest of the 4 women that he impregnated, meaning that she holds some power in the form of her seniority. In addition, O got Tavon's first name tattooed on her neck, let's remember, meaning that she is the most visibly, physically marked of the women. More importantly, she carried to term and birthed 2 of his children, as opposed to the other 3 girls, 1 each. Between lack of time and money from 2 kids, and unemployability from being a convict with a neck tattoo, White sort of has a duty to follow through with his promise to support his woman. In a perfect world, of course, he would support every one of his children and their mothers. And someone should definitely tell him to, but it's not going to be me. Now, let's get down to business. Although, before delving into how to prevent the problem of inmate-officer relations, and how it should be / has been addressed, we should discuss why relationships of this nature between an inmate and a prison worker are a problem in the first place. The reasons may seem obvious, but there could be more than you think. Out of principle, morally and legally, anyone who is or is trying to become a prison worker should know better than to form any sort of non-professional relationship of any kind with any inmates. Obviously, rules will always be broken, so such guidelines as this are in many cases irrelevant. What is always relevant, however, is the safety and security of everyone in a prison facility, inmates and employees alike. A desirable level of security can only be achieved if the boundary between prison and non-prisoner remains uncrossed and unblurred. If workers in prisons, particularly correctional officers, as in the situations at hand, do not establish a clear divide of power and rapport between them and the people they're supposed to be in charge of, then inmates are given openings to deviate from their role as prisoner. The second anyone with power over a prisoner shows some kind of weakness or a chance to personally connect in some way, they open the door for inmates to begin learning about them, and to use that which they learn against them. Even with the possibility of being manipulated or targeted on the table, many employees in institutional corrections facilities develop friendships and romantic or sexual relationships with the prisoners under their watch. So, let's next explore why this may occur, even with all the negative possibilities that may arise from it. For one thing, inmates and correctional officers share something which only they understand, the institution that they're in. They see the same horrors, the same pain, the same frustration day in and day out, with no one to talk to outside the prison who truly understands. In addition to this, some people inherently have personal boundary issues, which can put them even more. For example, personal stress, such as marriage troubles, a midlife crisis, or a great loss, can cause someone to let their emotional walls crumble, so to speak, leaving them with a weak spot or an opening in their defenses. Inmates are adept at recognizing weak people and the weaknesses within them, which allows them opportunities for manipulation. Knowing this, it is shown that women, particularly those who have suffered some form of abuse or manipulation in the past, seem to be drawn to dangerous, incarcerated men. Some women, occasionally dubbed serial killer groupies, harbor a sort of savior complex or rescue fantasy, in which they believe themselves to be the one with the ability to change a vicious criminal for the better. Other women have demonstrated a need to nurture and protect certain aspects of innocence they see in a criminal's personality, be it childlike curiosity or a way that they act. Others even seem to have a simple need for drama. These ladies are attracted by controversy, excitement, and the potential of danger. What all of these women have in common is that they have exploitable weaknesses. By allowing even the slightest amount of wiggle room, they establish a relationship in which flexibility is a possibility and manipulation is imminent. Not to mention, the power and influence some of these inmates have within their institution allows them to provide their partner of choice with various gifts and special privileges, sweetening the deal quite a bit in many cases. Making things even more complicated, no two inmates are alike in their manipulation. Some, known as heartbreakers, attempt to get on level ground with their superior by slowly testing limits and pushing boundaries. They may become touchy or flirty so as to determine how far the correctional officer will let them go, or how far the correctional officer will go for them. Others, known as hellraisers, simply wreak havoc, make problems, and draw attention to themselves so as to cause embarrassment for the correctional staff. Others still, known as exploiters, use their connections within the facility and skills at spotting vulnerabilities to create a situation in which a correctional officer owes them a favor or is being blackmailed by them. Regardless of methodology, every inmate that attempts to cultivate a more intimate relationship with a correctional officer performs a delicate dance, in which they go just far enough along their path to get what they want, without straying so far as to getting caught red-handed. What can be gathered from all this, really, is that inmates, especially those with a specific goal in mind, can be quite sly. I should clarify that prison employees are just as capable and likely as inmates to take advantage of another person in their institution. We are simply focusing on the opposite occurring in this instance. Okay, to finish up, let's briefly talk about overcoming this issue of exploitation by inmates of correctional employees. Frankly, only so much can be done, and most of it has already been tried, legally speaking. Two notable historic occasions should be mentioned. In 1997, the FBOP, or Federal Bureau of Prisons, defined sexual relationships between inmates and staff as a crime. In 2003, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, PREA, was signed, establishing that prison rape complaints could be resolved by prosecution authorities and prison officials at all levels of government. Both of these essentially allow for more options in terms of punishment and addressing such matters as inmate-correctional officer relations. On top of these large-scale, more well-known implementations of the law, most of what has been done to counter the issue of inmate manipulation has consisted of various policy, guideline, and training revisions and additions, all of which point in generally the same direction. They strive to bring light to the many potential situations in which prisoner manipulation of an officer occurs, and how to prevent ending up in those situations in the first place. In different institutions and prison organizations, at staggered degrees of influence, rules and policies have been adapted to include extensive clauses and information regarding inmate interactions. The importance of not showing weakness, not becoming biased, not getting enticed, tricked, used, hurt, or killed, and overall of representing a devoted correctional officer who is adept at their job is iterated and reiterated. In addition, these types of manipulative inmates that we previously discussed are explained in great detail and warned against, as well as the personality types of easily manipulated officers. Lastly, in tandem with the additions and changes to institutional guidelines, and with advice regarding the avoidance of inmate-officer relations, workers have been given additional trainings and classes so as to ensure they at least understand how they are expected to act. This is also done to guarantee that their knowledge on the dangers to avoid when interacting with inmates is accurately tested. At the end of the day, let's just hope that over time, more correctional officers will become aware of all the possible dangers that come with working in a prison, not just the obvious ones like threats to physical safety. With new rules and teachings in place, perhaps prison employees will soon be better at heeding the warnings and avoiding being taken advantage of by the inmates under their watch. Maybe they'll start following the laws that they're supposed to uphold. Luckily for the entertainment industry though, they probably won't. Thank you everyone for watching, and have a good night.